Hi, I'm Larry King, and I'd like to introduce you to someone who's been a guest on my show several times. He has a story that's very compelling, and you should listen.
Meet speaker and New York Times best-selling author Michael Hingson and his guide dog, Africa.
Michael Hingson has been blind since birth. Michael was on the 78th floor of the World Trade Center, the one building, the North Tower. He was guided out by his guide dog, Roselle, and another colleague. All right, what happened? What do you remember?
There was an incredible bang, sort of a dull thud, but certainly very tremendous, and then the building shook very violently, and I remember sort of going, God, don't let that building tip over.
The tragic events of September 11th are still ingrained in Michael's memory. Ten years later, Michael had the opportunity to return to New York, to grieve, to remember, and to move on. Michael Hingson and his guide dog, Roselle, were celebrated at the Hero Dog Awards in Los Angeles, California.
My former guide dog is one of the 8 finalists in this award, Roselle. This is Africa, who is her stand-in. We worked in the World Trade Center on 9/11 and escaped because of the teamwork of Roselle and Bee, and the solid, just steadfast commitment of Roselle to do her job.
Welcome you all to Irvine Valley College. My name is Professor Rupa Mathur. I work here in the School of Business Sciences, and I teach a lot of different classes, including computer information and management classes. My other hat here is I have the privilege of being the Academic Affairs Chair and presenting the Distinguished Academic Lecture Series to you all. Wow. This is when we bring in distinguished speakers from outside Irvine Valley College to present to our Irvine Valley College community, including the students that are here, the administrators, the deans, the staff, and the community as well. So thank you so much for coming. I also want to thank the people who helped put all this together, the IVC Academic Senate, the President, the Board of Trustees, the ASIVC, which is our student organization, and the DSPS, and Linda Fontanella, who is the Vice President of Student Services. So thank you to all those people who helped us put this DALS together. And now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Michael Hingson. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you, and good afternoon. Sorry we're a little late. All I need to do to make you understand is to say, airline snafu. I'd like you to meet Africa. This is my guide dog. Up. There's Africa. Africa is a 6 and 2/3 year old guide dog from Guide Dogs for the Blind in San Rafael, and she's been there, done that, seen airline snafus before, so you know, what do you do? And the thing about Africa is she's really a great teacher because she sleeps through it all, and if that isn't avoiding stress, I don't know what is. And listening to all the thanks and so on, I want to also appreciate my thanks to everyone. Gee, that sounds like an Academy Award speech. If ever I heard one, I'd like to thank my mom who made this possible, and my dad who helped my mom make this possible. And everyone else, and Thomas Edison for doing some things with electricity, and Nicole Tesla for coming up with alternate current. Oh, the lights are showing. I can't, they're saying I have to stop now. So one of the people I would like to thank, Monica, are you here? So I'd like you to thank, give a round of applause for Monica. She's the one who contacted me from... Now Monica, I must say, had a real concern because she said, well, how are we going to know when to have you stop talking? And or maybe I guess another way of, she didn't put it this way, but is, when do we tell you you've worn out your welcome? And I said, well, I don't know, what do you think? And she said, well, we could hold up a sign at the back. She wasn't thinking at the time. So I said, that's a good idea, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak until I see the sign. So, we're either going to have a religious miracle or a very long speech. Stephen Douglas, or Douglas back in the 1800s, was a great orator and opposed Abraham Lincoln a lot of times and talked a lot, and I figure I ought to be able to do at least as well as he can, certainly as well as some of the filibusterers that we have in Washington. Talk about people who are clueless and have no ability to create a working team anymore. And that's what I talk about a lot. Well, so there, we've picked on everybody enough, but you guys are great, and it's good to be here. Give yourselves a round of applause. I do need to tell you that I'm used to the Irvine area. I am a graduate of University of California, Irvine, just over the hill and down the road a little ways. I first came to UCI in September of 1968. So there were like 4 or 5 buildings on the campus. There was still Bob Burns at Fashion Island, my favorite restaurant. It's not there anymore. And all of this was just a dream in someone's eye, but it's really good always to come back and be able to spend some time in Orange County. I enjoy it a lot, and I'm really glad to be here. But why are we here? Well, I've been trying to figure that out myself, so if anybody has any ideas, please let me know. Distinguished speaker. Wow, what the heck is with that? I love to tell people that they ask how I became a public speaker, and so, I tell them, well, for those that know and for those of you who don't know, 12 years ago, now 12 years and almost 2 months, I was working in the World Trade Center in New York City. I worked for a company called Quantum Corporation. Actually, I worked for a division called ATL, which stands for ATL, but I think it really was supposed to be Automated Tape Library. At least that's what it kind of supposed to be. Any ATL people in the room want to correct that? Yeah, well, and ATL is just down the road a little ways on the Irvine campus. Anyway, so I was working there, and I was the Mid-Atlantic Region Sales Manager for Quantum, and my job was to run the office, hire people, and originally open the office. We did it on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. 78 floors is pretty high. It is so high that, any of you Johnny Carson people, it is so high that... Good job! They don't do any of those neat things on TV anymore. It is so high that on the 4th of July, people would come to our office to look down on the fireworks displays. Seriously. It was over 1,000 feet in the air, and people really did. They came to our office. We had a great view, and we could see the whole lower part of Manhattan out to the bay and so on, and people came to look at the fireworks displays. It was also so high that sometimes cell phones didn't work because we were above the cells. What can I say? And so it was a neat place to have an office. It was in the hub of a lot of the action of New York, and it was especially good because it was the kind of place that an office like ours needed to be in. That is to say, it was great because we were able to access and be with all the financial people and a lot of other kinds of organizations that needed our products. And what we built were products that would allow people to back up all of their computer data. So I was in that office on September 11th, 2001, and escaped. And we'll talk about that because I know everybody probably wants to hear it. Do you guys want to hear the story? Yeah. All right, just checking. On the day that people don't want to hear that, then I might reconsider what I say. But I didn't say I was going to stop speaking. Did you notice that? But anyway, so after 9/11, the next day, my wife Karen suggested that I call Guide Dogs for the Blind and tell them that we had been in the building. And the reason that she suggested that I do that is that, in fact, several of the people from Guide Dogs had visited us in the World Trade Center, and we figured that somebody would eventually remember that I was there. And so as a result, I called, talked to a number of people, including a woman named Joanne Ritter, who was the public information officer. She said, gee, can we put out a story about you? And you know, that's all for Guide Dogs' benefit, but I thought, okay, sure, if it's going to help Guide Dogs, that's great. Well, the next thing she said is, you know, your story's going to really probably be pretty big. What TV show do you want to be on? And I'm sitting there going, what are you talking about? But she was saying it with this little grin. And Joanne, I will tell you, is a very bright person, one of my favorite people. She's great with PR and publicity and all that. I was in shock still after 9/11, and I was also stiff as a board. I woke up that morning just hardly able to walk. I'm glad that our house had an elevator, and I'll get to that. But I said, just not even thinking, Larry King Live. 2 days later, we had the first of 5 interviews on Larry King Live. Even before Larry King, Newsweek called and wanted to chat. The media got a hold of the story, and in today's terminology, it went viral. We got lots of calls from people to come and be interviewed or to come to our house to be interviewed. I can tell you that I am an expert on how different countries handle interviews. I have seen everything from 1 or 2 people who do a very efficient interview from New Zealand to the Italians who send 7 or 8 people who mostly just stand around and don't do anything except talk Italian, and one person really ends up doing all the work, and we never did figure out why all those people were there, but nevertheless they were. But that wasn't the end of the story and the reason that I'm telling it. Then what happened, since people ask why it is that I got into public speaking, then what happened is that people started calling and writing and saying, would you come and tell your story? And you know what? We'll pay you a fee and expenses for doing it. Now, I've been in sales for almost 30 years by that point. Think about it. A sales guy getting calls saying, just come and talk to us and we'll pay you for talking to us and nothing else. Is that as good as it gets or what? Well, I joined the staff of Guide Dogs for the Blind because they also asked me to come and be a representative for them and a spokesperson for them. So we did that from 2002 to 2008. One CEO was in charge most of the time, then he left the organization, a new CEO came in and said, well, no one's interested in your story anymore, and we're going to phase out your job. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for the moment. But now, I think it's important to talk about the whole story. And it's important to do so for this reason. The story isn't how I got out of the World Trade Center. The story isn't about what happened that day. The story really is about how I got there and what happened afterward. And what I mean by how I got there is my life, in a sense. And I don't mean that in an egotistical way, but on February 24th, 1950, I was born. I was born just like any other kid, sighted and all that stuff, except I was born 2 months premature, kind of in a hurry. I only weighed 2 pounds, 13 ounces, and I haven't gained too much since, but, you know. So I was put in an incubator with pure oxygen, and what that resulted in is my retina's not developing properly, a condition that later became known as retrolentofibromalacia. And if you don't know how to spell it, there's this neat book that the bookstore is selling called Thunderdog, The Story of a Blind Man, a Guide Dog, and the Triumph of Trust, and we expect you to buy that book when you leave, and you'll learn how to spell retrolentofibromalacia. And you'll learn some other things too, but the important thing is that you'll learn to spell retrolentofibromalacia. So it wasn't known that I was blind. I was discovered to be blind at about 4 months of age. My aunt was babysitting me. My parents had actually gone to California to see relatives, and I stayed home. So my aunt was carrying me over to a window to close the curtains, and she noticed that I wasn't reacting to the sunlight. So when my parents got back, she said to them that she thought that I couldn't see. They took me to the doctor, and the doctor said, yes, your child cannot see. And what we believe that you should do is to put your child in a home. Send him away. I understand he's your son, but send him away, because the reality is no blind child can ever amount to anything. The fact is that blind kids are never going to be anything except a drain on society, and the best thing you can do is to send him away. He'll be a burden on you. He will mess up your elder son's life, and so that would be what we suggest. If you think that's bad, it's worse in other places. I was in Japan last year, and I was told that the common practice when a child was born with a disability in the 1950s was to drown it in a bucket of water. So sending one away to a home, I'm not sure which would be worse, actually. But my parents, my father with an 8th grade education and my mother with a high school education, diploma, and a beautician's license, my parents said no. You're wrong. That makes no sense. Why is he any different than anyone else? Has anyone here watched, let me do it this way. How many people have seen the movie Lincoln? All right, now, for those who answered immediately, let me ask you a question. How bright do you think it is that when a blind lecturer is speaking and asks you a question that you answer by raising your hands? And that's a lesson we're going to talk about today, which is recognizing that there are times to not necessarily do things in the same ordinary way. How many people have seen Lincoln? Yes. How many have not? Yes. Wow, this is one of the first places where I've been where most people have seen Lincoln, at least those who are brave enough to respond. There's a scene in Lincoln. The scene is that Lincoln is about to cave. So the story is that Lincoln is trying to get the 14th Amendment to the Constitution passed. The 14th Amendment would abolish slavery forever. On one side you have Lincoln fighting an uphill battle because people really didn't, a lot of people at least, didn't want to get rid of slavery. The Confederacy at the end of 1864, going into the beginning of 1865, wanted to get back into the Union before the amendment was passed so that they could help vote it down. So you got lots of forces against Lincoln. There were in fact representatives of the Confederacy at the end of 1864 in Virginia waiting for the summons to come and negotiate a surrender. One day Lincoln walks into a room where there are 2 telegraphers. He is prepared to send a message instructing General Grant to bring the representatives to the White House to negotiate. He gets in there and he's stalling and waiting around. He writes the message out. Finally, the telegrapher takes it and he said, "Shall I transmit?" And then Lincoln is still stalling, and he asks some questions of the telegraphers that finally resulted in one of them saying that he had been an engineer before the war. And all of a sudden Lincoln perked up. Lincoln said, "An engineer? Then you must have read Euclid." And the engineer said, "Well, I don't know that I did." And Lincoln said, "Well," the telegrapher said, "I don't think I did in school." And Lincoln said, "Well, I didn't have much schooling, but I read Euclid. It was a book I borrowed. Not much of it stuck up here, but some of it did." Euclid's 2,000 years old at that time, a little older now. Euclid wrote his first postulate of mathematics in this book, and the postulate said, when things are each equal to something, then everything is equal. When things are all equal to something, then everything is equal. He said, Euclid said it was self-evident because it works. And based on that, Lincoln went out, worked harder, had renewed spirit, and got past the 14th Amendment to abolish slavery. And I submit that postulate is very relevant to my story and the story of anyone else with a disability in this country or anything else. Because at the beginning, before we know anything about any child, we assume they're all equal. We believe in the concept of equality. And then we hear, oh, but that person's got a disability. But the Declaration of Independence talks about all people being created equal. The Constitution mostly presumes it. And we're striving harder and harder every day to make sure that we bring more equality into the world. Prejudice, unfortunately, still exists in great measure in some quarters. If, for example, you are a person with a disability, you are not truly considered equal. The doctors told my parents to put me in a home. As I grew up, I didn't have a lot of exposure to blind kids and blind people really until I was close to high school. I met a few, but didn't really interact with them much and didn't really have a lot of involvement with them. Some. I grew up for my first 5 years of life in Chicago, Illinois, and then moved to Palmdale, California, about 100 miles north of here, in 1955. Palmdale at that time was a town that had more tumbleweeds and desert tortoises than it had people. We were at the edge of civilization in Palmdale. A lot of rattlers around too. My dad drove every day to Edwards Air Force Base. Originally he drove to Plant 42, which is now called the Skunk Works, Lockheed Martin, but then later went to Edwards Air Force Base. And I grew up, I traveled around my neighborhood, I learned how to listen. That adventure started when I was about 3. I had a little pedal car in Chicago and I was riding my car around the house and so on. One day I was racing around the house and the front of the car, as it could do, went under the coffee table, but the coffee table stopped at my chin. And I still can feel the scar where I had this pretty serious cut. My mom rushed me to the hospital. On our way home, I was very worried about what was going to happen to me in the pedal car because I was having so much fun with that. And my mom must have sensed that. My mom turned to me and she said, look, about you in the car, you've got to do a better job of watching where you're going. Now, you cited bigots. To see, according to the dictionary, means to perceive. It doesn't necessarily mean with the eyes, so nerdy, nerdy, nerdy. But the reality is, I understood what she said. She was really saying, I got to do a better job of listening because that's my way of watching. And I did, and never had another accident with the car, although I continued to race. And then in 1955, we moved to California, and about a year later, I discovered bicycles. A friend moved into the area, or someone that became a friend, and I learned to ride a bike on her bike. And then later, my parents said, well, you've been doing this often enough, and you and Cindy keep trading off, so we got to get you a bike. And they got me a bike. And so I started driving around the neighborhood. I rode to school. I didn't need assistance. I learned to listen. I learned to travel. I learned to function as well as any other kid. There were things that I didn't do as well or didn't have access to doing as well, but I could do the things that I needed to do. And there were other things that I could do that other kids couldn't do. For example, I didn't have access to Braille textbooks until I was in the 4th grade. But my parents helped me with homework. My dad discovered that I was pretty interested in math and science, so I was doing algebra in my head by the time I was 6. I was playing with crystal radios and doing a lot of other science things and experimenting and playing with all sorts of gadgets as I was growing up. And had a lot of fun exploring. I remember when my dad got his first tape recorder and we started exploring with that. And I started playing with it and made all sorts of interesting sounds come out of it and just did some things. We recorded TV shows and I was just fascinated by the whole concept. I was about 8 at the time. But I was especially encouraged to explore. So when I was riding my bike, I had a lot of fun. I learned to listen. I could hear cars coming and move to the side. I could hear parked cars as we got close to them. I could avoid them because I knew the differences in sounds. Just like you see the differences in light reflections, which is all your eyesight really is. So I learned to do all that, and I was able to travel around. One day I was riding my bike, having a gay old time, came back after riding it, went into the house. About the time I got there, the phone rang. My dad picked up the phone, and I'm going to just tell you the conversation. I only heard his side, but you can imagine it. You'll see. So he said hello, and the neighbor at the other end said, "I'm calling about your kid. He's riding his bike out on the street." And my dad said, "Well, okay, so?" And the neighbor said, "Well, you're letting him do that?" And my dad said, "Yeah, he can ride his bike out on the street. What's the problem with that?" "Well, he shouldn't be out there." And my dad said, "Well, why not?" "Well, no, you don't understand. I'm not talking about the sighted one, the older kid. I'm talking about the blind kid." And my dad said, "Well, so? What's wrong with that?" "Well, he's blind." "Well, so? What's wrong with that?" "Well, he can't see." My dad said, "Well, let me ask you, did he have an accident?" "Well, no." "Did he hit anyone?" "No." "Was he having any problem at all?" "No." Was anybody endangered by him in any way?" "No." "Well, then what's the problem?" And the person hung up. I don't know whether they ever learned. But the reality is, it didn't matter what I was doing. It didn't matter how well I was doing it. That individual could not get past the fact that I was blind. I ask you the question, in reality, who was the blind one? As I said, I rode to school. I did all the things that I needed to, and then when I was in the 4th grade, they switched me and a bunch of kids to a different school, and we had to ride the bus. I did not try to drive the bus in the 4th grade, but I rode the bus to school and went to Tamarisk School across town and had a good time there, and that's when I first started really getting an opportunity to obtain Braille books and so on. The school district had gotten organized enough to make that happen, and so I went through 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Along the way, we met a woman named Sharon Gold, who was a teacher at Edwards Air Force Base. She had just been hired to teach the on-base kids. She happened to be blind and had a guide dog, and so my parents invited her over, and we got a chance to meet her and learn about guide dogs and so on. And I spent time with Sharon, and she spent time with us, and we all talked about what it meant to be blind. And Sharon was very encouraging in that I could do whatever I chose to do with my life. Well, eventually the time was going to come for me to go into high school. When my parents started thinking about it, they said, this is going to be a much bigger school, a lot more kids. You've got to have a better way of getting around because you're not going to be able to hear all the polls and other things that you can at the schools you're going to now. You're just not going to be able to hear as much. And we've been meeting with Sharon, and even though the age limit is 16, we will see if we can get a guide dog. Well, they didn't really tell me all of that, but that's what they were thinking. They applied, and in reality, I ended up being accepted at the age of 14 to go to Guide Dogs for the Blind in San Rafael and get a guide dog. The only times I had been away from home before had been a couple of times when I went to Boy Scout camps. By the time I went to get my guide dog, I was a Life Scout in the Boy Scouts of America. And I was excited about going into high school. I went up to Guide Dogs and I spent 4 weeks there. And I remember we got there on a Sunday, and the first 3 days they taught us all about the commands we would be using and the footwork to work with the dog. And they spent all this time talking about the technique. I think it was important to do that. What they didn't talk about, and they still don't talk about as much, is another aspect, and I'll get to that in just a moment. On Wednesday, I think it was, if I recall, Wednesday's the 1st of July in 1964. I was told my guide dog's name was Squire. It was a 64-pound golden retriever born on May 2nd, my mom's birthday. It was a very dark amber color. They described it as that, almost red. And that afternoon, I was called to the trainer's office. I was sat down in a chair, which is what everyone went through. Then they brought the dog in. They turned the dog loose to see how the dog would react to me, and I was told to do nothing. Well, this dog, Squire, comes over to me and starts sniffing me from one end to the other, not paying attention to anything else, just checking me out. And finally, Mr. Bensler, who was the apprentice instructor, he was in charge of this part of the operation. Later, he became CEO of Guide Dogs. But Mr. Bensler said after about 30 seconds, well, it really looks like you found a friend. Why don't you say hello? So I started petting Squire, and Squire kind of liked that. So it looked like we were going to hit it off pretty well. I took him back to my room, and we spent the next 3.5 weeks learning to work together, learning all those techniques. But as I said, Guide Dogs didn't really talk about what was truly happening. They certainly didn't talk about it as much as I would like to see them do. What we were doing was not only bonding, and they talked about we're going to create this bond, but what we were doing was developing a team. We were creating as close a team as anyone can make. We were creating the kind of team that you hear about with SEAL Team 6 from the elite forces, the ones that went and got Osama bin Laden. The kind of team that you find where anyone works with each other day in and day out and grows so close that they can truly predict what the other is thinking and how to react. That's what we really learned at Guide Dogs for the Blind. I learned to build a team in a way that very few people ever have the luxury and the joy of doing. Because it's not theory, it's life, it's practice, and it's what keeps us all alive. Those of us that use dogs. And I learned later, and in thinking about it, everybody builds teams. And we really should do more of that. Is this being piped to Washington, D.C.? I hope. Anyway, so I really learned to build a team. Then I went to high school. Started my freshman year, and it wasn't long before I discovered something about Squire. Squire had a malicious sense of humor. You all went to high school, some of you more recently than others. I know there might be a few who just got their high school equivalency, but most people went to high school and most people went to a school. What happens during breaks and recess and so on? Everyone stands around and talks. And they block the sidewalks. And no offense, ladies, but at my high school there were lots of groups of girls that tended to do that. And they stood right in the middle of the sidewalk and they were talking. Well, we had a dress code back at our high school. Dresses had to be no more than 2 inches below to 2 inches above the knees. And we were walking along one day, trying to get through a group of people talking. And I don't know whether it was all girls or not, but it sounded like it. I remember the day it happened. All of a sudden I heard a scream. And I was told a couple minutes later, somebody almost hit you in the head because they thought you were getting fresh and forward. Then they discovered it was your dog. Cold nose on bare leg. Squire is a one trial learner. I'm telling you that after that, if there were crowds on the sidewalk talking, Squire went for the nearest girl and cleared the sidewalk in lightning time. We always had clear sailing down the sidewalks after just a few days. And I'm telling you, I promise I didn't teach him that. I promise I didn't. I wouldn't have thought of it. He was great. That March, I was called into the principal's office, and I was told that the superintendent had made a decision. We have a rule in our school system. The vice principal said, he said, I don't like to tell you this, but we have a rule. And the rule is that no live animals are to be allowed on school buses, which means you can't take your guide dog on a school bus. And since you use your guide dog we're going to have to find an alternative way to get you to the school because you can't take your guide dog. Now, when I was at Guide Dogs for the Blind, I was given a card and told about the state penal code law that said, under section 643.5 of the penal code, back in 1964-65, that no blind person could be denied the opportunity to take their dog with them anywhere that the public was allowed to go, including on buses, trains, common carriers, aircraft, and so on. And I told that to the vice principal, and the vice principal said, well, but our rules are what we go by. And I don't have any say in the matter. He said, I am really sorry. And Mr. Fisher was. I went home and my dad hit the roof, immediately demanding a hearing before the board. We finally got our hearing. Before we did, my dad went and spent an afternoon in the library. My dad, with his 8th grade education, went over and started reading law books. He was very well self-taught. He went off and started reading law books. He looked up the law. He looked up the definitions of the terms in the law using Black's Law Dictionary and discovered that common carrier, a legal term, includes, guess what? School buses. So we went to the hearing feeling very good about our chances. We got there, some other business was addressed, and then our case came up. The superintendent got up and explained, this is really simple. We have a rule, no dogs, no live animals allowed on the buses, and the dog can't go. That's it. Now, the superintendent was a bully. We started learning over time more about him, but leave that aside for the moment. Then my dad got a chance to plead our case, and he said, you know, this is really very simple. Section 643.5 of the state penal code says that it is a felony to deny a blind person with a guide dog access to any place that the public can go, including common carriers, and the school bus, according to Black's Law Dictionary, is a common carrier. He spoke to the board, but he was mainly speaking to the chair of the board, George Kartosian, who is a lawyer, and who, by the way, had presided at my Star Scout Court of Honor. So we know Mr. Kartosian. And my dad said, so, you know, the issue is, which one of you wants to spend a year in jail for denying my son access to the school bus? Superintendent got up and just said to Mr. Kartosian, I remembered, is he right? Arrogant. Mr. Kartosian said, yep. Nevertheless, the board voted 3-2 to support the superintendent. My dad went home and immediately wrote Governor Pat Brown, the governor of the state of California, laying out the entire case, sent the letter, and I don't know what happened after that. None of us do. We never probably will. And I love to tell people I've got an imagination that's better than most. But all we know is that we heard that Mr. Reber, the superintendent, was summoned to Sacramento, and the next week I was back on the bus. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall. I took 2 lessons away from that. One, I was blind, I was different, and I had to deal with that. And I had a choice to make as to whether I was going to be bitter about it or whether I was going to deal with it and move forward with my life. But the other lesson I learned was that you could fight City Hall and win. And that there was such a thing as right winning over wrong, notwithstanding most alien movies, Twilight Zones, and other sci-fi and horror things that I watch from time to time. I told you, I have a great imagination. I went on to college after doing well in high school. I was there a quarter at UCI, and over the vacation, the Christmas break, this letter came. And the letter said, congratulations, you're on the dean's list. I'd never heard of the dean's list, but I thought that was pretty cool, so I decided I was going to continue to work at trying to be on that list. My major was physics. I have now a master's degree in physics. I went through college, got a master's degree in physics, and had close to a 3.9 GPA through graduate school at UC Irvine. That's the blind kid that the doctor said couldn't amount to anything. Now, there were roadblocks along the way, some I didn't know about, like a letter that was put in my file that one physics professor wrote that said a blind person couldn't possibly absorb the material necessary to get an advanced degree in physics. Since when does a lack of eyesight mean a lack of vision? Since when does a lack of eyesight mean a lack of intelligence? We have deep prejudices in this country, and that's the problem. In 1974, a gentleman named Raymond Kurzweil, I was in my second year of graduate school, going into my second year of graduate school, Raymond Kurzweil went to the National Federation of the Blind, the largest organization of blind people in the country, an organization of something over 50,000 blind people. Any blind people in the room? Not knowing who you are, member of the NFB? Who is that? Hello. And the National Federation of the Blind being the largest organization of blind people in the country, Ray went to them and said, I got a neat thing. And unfortunately for Ray, he was met with that kind of a comment, with the usual skepticism. People are always trying to come up with the latest neat thing for blind people that never really do anything. Ray said, no, I'm different. Everybody says that. I got a machine that will allow you to take a printed book, any kind of printed material or type material, put it down on my scanner, it'll take a picture of the page and it'll read it out loud. And he was so convincing that a few people decided to go up and check it out. They went to his laboratory in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they brought their own material, and what do you know? Literally, they could put their stuff down and read it. The first time blind people could truly read printed material. Technology was moving forward. What Ray had done was to develop the algorithms that have been refined so much over the years, but the algorithms that allowed someone to take any type style or group of type styles on a page or printed material, proportional or unit width, and read it. Now, there are a lot of applications that something like that were good for. You could take the information and store it in a computer file and create a database of documents, which later happened. But Ray wanted his first version of that technology to be used to make it possible for blind people to read. The Federation got excited. The Federation developed a project with Ray to go out and seek funding to buy 5 of these machines at $50,000 each, as well as to hire staff and put the machines around the country so that people who were blind could use them, learn to use them, learn to operate with them, read material on their own, and develop a series of recommendations for Ray Kurzweil that would allow him to make a production model of the machine. And by mid-1976, that was all in place. I had gotten my master's degree and had actually taken some business courses, and I was invited to be the day-to-day director of that project, literally living out of suitcases, traveling around the country, working with people to teach them to use the machine, writing curriculum, and all the other things that I said. I had gotten involved in the National Federation of the Blind in 1972, went to my first national convention in 1973. 1,000 blind people plus descending on the Statler Hilton in New York City. Never saw something like that before. It was cool. And I was excited to see that a lot of people had the same philosophy about blindness that I did. Namely, that blindness really was a nuisance, or it could be reduced to the level of a nuisance with proper training. Let me change that slightly. Sighted people can learn to cope with the world and function in the world with proper training. Why is it any different for blind people? And that's the philosophy that this organization had. This organization that was founded in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania in 1940. So I was asked to do this. I went and lived in Massachusetts. I'd never lived away from home. Suddenly one Sunday, flying 3,000 miles to go spend time in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Lived in Back Bay, Boston. That was cool. Spent time on Beacon Hill. Learned a lot about Massachusetts and spent time learning the history, and then later getting involved in some legislative efforts, which we'll get to. But the bottom line is that eventually the project ended and Ray Kurzweil's machine became a production model. I was hired by the company and asked to do the same thing I was doing before, which is to do human factors studies. But in 1979, probably about March or April, I was called into the, no, it was about July or August, I was called into the office of the VP of Marketing and said, we're going to have to lay you off. I had joined in November of '78. He said, we're laying you off not because you're doing anything wrong, but we hired too many people too fast and we have to let you go. There is one option for you, however, and that is if you want to go into sales, we'll let you stay. But we don't want you to sell the Kurzweil reading machine for the blind. We want you to sell the Kurzweil data entry machine, which is the version that would scan printed material and convert it to computer readable form. A lot of extra processing and so on that went along with it. And that was intended for anything from law offices to publishers or anybody that needed to take documents and make them electronic from paper. Well, I had a debate. I had moved to Massachusetts. I had gotten all my furniture out of storage, and I decided to myself, do I go look for another job or do I stay? The National Federation of the Blind, for years, had been talking about the statistic that over 70% of all employable blind people couldn't get a job. The unemployment rate among employable blind people was over 70%. Not because we couldn't do the job, but because people didn't think we could do the job. I decided I'd lower my standards from science and go into sales. It's economic, come on. Besides that, I also was of a mind that I could use things I had learned in my studies in physics and my disciplines in physics. I could use what I learned to help me in sales. So I went into sales, took a Dale Carnegie sales course, passed it, was the Dale Carnegie Sales Talk Championship for the class, and went on and sold. In 1981, Kurzweil was being courted by Xerox, or Kurzweil was courting Xerox. I'm not even really sure which, but the bottom line is Xerox was going to purchase Kurzweil. I was asked to relocate back to California to help with the integration on the West Coast end. So I came out here and lived in a condo right up here in Santa Ana for a year. That was in September, October of 1981. In 1982, by the way, I now had my second guide dog, Holland, who I got in 1973. He was also a golden retriever, a really great dog. And if you buy that book I told you about, Thunderdog, the story of a blind man, a guide dog, and the triumph of trust, you can learn about Holland and some of the tricks that he pulled. I thought that Squire had a sense of humor. Holland did too, and Holland was all about vengeance sometimes. But I could stay here for years telling stories, so I won't, other than to say it's in the book. And I, now in early 1982, a friend introduced me to a woman named Karen Ashurst. Karen uses a wheelchair. And along the way, we just decided that it clicked. And in November of 1982, we were married. And we will be celebrating our 31st wedding anniversary a week from tomorrow. We knew the marriage was going to last. It was November 27th, 1982. The wedding was supposed to start at 4 o'clock, and we were in the church in our little rooms waiting. 4 o'clock came. The church was less than half full. We couldn't understand it. 5 after 4, nothing was happening. The organ was playing, and everybody was going, "What's happening? What's happening? This is not right. Where is everyone?" 10 after 4, nothing was happening. At 4:12, the doors burst open, and the crowd came in, and the wedding went on. Later, we asked what happened. Everyone was outside. By the way, Karen is an SC graduate. Everyone was outside waiting for the end of the USC Notre Dame game, and we knew that the marriage was going to last because SC won. Yay! Go Trojans. I was invited to a wedding of a cousin a few years ago, and we were going in an elevator down to get into the car to go to the wedding, and there was this guy in the elevator. My brother and I were both there. We didn't know this guy, but all of a sudden he said, "God is a Jesuit." I went, "God is a Jesuit? What the heck are you talking about?" He said, "Well, God's a Jesuit. Boston College is beating Notre Dame 27-25. Okay. They won that game, by the way, too. Anyway, so maybe God is a Jesuit. So anyway, I met and married Karen, and we moved into a house in Mission Viejo. Kurzweil completed the deal with Xerox. Xerox bought the company and started phasing out all of the salespeople because they wanted to bring their own people in. And at the end of June, I got this letter saying that I was no longer going to be a part of the company. I was being terminated. And so I then had to go look for a job. I worked for 7 months to try to find a job and couldn't find one. And eventually, with a couple of people, I started my own company called The System Connection. The company was to sell computer-aided design systems to architects. Go figure, a blind guy doing that? I didn't need to operate the equipment. There were other people who could do that, and all I needed to do was to learn how to operate some of the equipment to make it possible to help in the process. And that became relatively interesting later. I didn't need to see a PowerPoint presentation once Windows started coming up with that and Microsoft started developing that suite of products. All I needed to know was when the slides were appearing, what slide it was, and so on. And with a talking computer and so on, I can do that. And the neat thing about a blind person doing any of this with graphics or PowerPoints and so on is we don't have to turn to look at the screen. Because I'm listening to the computer very quietly telling me what's going on. And I could point over my shoulder when I was selling quantum products, for example. The ATL P3000 is on the left side of your screen, and I use a little pointer. You can see that it has what we call Prism technology, which is proprietary to quantum. This unit has 16 tape drives, 326 tape cartridges. You can even marry 5 of them together to get a total of 80 tape drives and 1,630 cartridges, and so on and so on. And on the right side of your screen, you can see the ATL P1000 and so on. People would come up to me later and they would say, "We're really not happy with you because we didn't dare fall asleep during your presentation. We forgot you were blind and you never looked away." My response was, well, you could have fallen asleep if you had remembered, but if you had, we would have got you anyway, because you may think that the dog is asleep, but the dog is down there taking notes. What I really learned was, so what if I were different, as Dale Carnegie taught, turn liabilities into assets? Well, we ran the System Connection for 4 years, and then I wanted to go back into the workforce because there were a lot of forces that were just not making it as profitable as I would like, and so I started looking for jobs, and we sold the System Connection. And then my wife, one day I was talking with Karen about this, and my wife said, you know, so there's this job, this looks pretty good, you going to apply for it? And I said, well, I don't know, because it's the usual thing. The unemployment rate's over 70%. If I say I'm blind, they're never going to give me an interview. If I don't say I'm blind, they may give me an interview and they're going to be mad at me because I didn't say I was blind, so that they could put up their defenses, and I probably won't get the job. And she, at that point, this was now 1989, she said, remember, you're the one that preaches turn liabilities into assets. And you know, they have in those cartoons a little light bulb that goes off over your head and goes on? I'm telling you, it's real. I'm blind, I could see it. I saw the light. I went in and just whipped out this letter to have as my resume cover letter. And the last paragraph in the letter went something like this. The most important thing you should know about me is that I happen to be blind. As a blind person, I have had to sell all of my life just to function and survive. I've had to sell to convince people to let me buy a house. I've had to sell to convince people to let me fly on airplanes, sometimes with my guide dog, or to rent an apartment or go into stores when they didn't want to let me in because of the dog. I had to sell to convince them it was okay. So when you're hiring a salesperson for this job, do you want to hire someone who just sells during the day because that's what they do, and then they go home at night and they forget it? Or do you want to hire somebody whose life is about sales and who understands sales for the science and art that it is, and who sells as a life skill all the time? I got the interview and I got the job. And I submit to you, all too often when we hunker down and we're very frustrated because something isn't going our way, and then they say it's your fault because of this and that and the other stuff, what do you learn from it? And more important, what liabilities do they say that you have that you can turn into assets? It's all about changing the rules and recognizing that you don't always have control over everything that occurs in your life, but you do have control over how you deal with what happens in your life. That's what we're talking about. I went to work for this company, Articon, and later I was transferred to New York City to open an office for Articon. We did on the 23rd floor of Tower 2 of the World Trade Center. It was now 1996, and then I left the company when I was recruited away. I recruited a couple of times, but in 1999, Quantum asked me to join them. I'd been selling their products for a reseller, but I joined them in order to start selling their products and open an office for them in New York City. And as I said earlier, we opened it on August 1st, 2000 on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. I hired a staff. I taught the staff teamwork. I told every member of the sales staff, I am a second person on your account team. You're going to be selling to accounts. That's great. I am here to help you, and I am part of your team. What we have to do is to figure out the best way I can be of help to you. And we did that with every salesperson. The bright ones realized that blindness was one of the most significant assets they had in a manager, because people didn't know me. Salespeople would say, I'm going to take you in to do presentations. We'd go into rooms. People would be caught totally flat-footed because my sales guy never said that I was blind. We go in the room and they don't know what to do with me. I get them talking and get them to answer a lot of questions, learn a lot about what they can do and what they need and what they want. Also, it didn't hurt to be very technical, and I read all the product briefings and all the technical briefings about our products, so I was as technical as any engineer, so I could talk to people at all levels. And that was an advantage by any definition. Sometimes I would tell customers, we don't have the right product for you. Bosses hated that. But the other side of it is that our customers became well trained as to what we had and what we could do. And when it came time to provide or get something that they knew we could do, they would call us and they'd ask us just to give them a quote and sell them the product. They didn't even put it out for bid. Because one of the lessons I learned along the way was, in sales, the only real thing you have to sell is yourself. Everything else is secondary. The only thing you really have to sell is yourself and your word. Everything falls into line after that. Well, we opened the office, had a good working sales force. In August of 2001, I was talking to a couple of our distributor friends and our reseller friends, and we decided to hold a seminar. I was talking to one of the people at Quantum ATL who was working with distributors, and he said, yeah, I'll help set it up. We chose as the distributor Ingram Micro. Well, the way the sales process worked is that a lot of companies were very small and they couldn't afford to establish credit and deep relationships with us, so they bought from a distributor. A distributor was a company that simply bought products from companies, manufacturers, then they sold them to smaller companies who then integrated them into whatever they're selling, and they sold it to their customers. So it's called two-tier sales. Ingram Micro put this thing on, and on September 11th, 2001, we were going to be holding 4 seminars. 50 people would be coming through our offices that day. That morning at 12:30, I was expecting to get a good night's sleep, but I was awakened by Roselle, who was very nervous and fidgety. Roselle was afraid of thunderstorms, and all of a sudden she was acting frantic, and we knew a storm was coming. Roselle and I went down to my office. We went to my desk, which was out of line of sight from any windows. We were in our basement. And I turned up the stereo so that she wouldn't have to hear the thunder. But God does have a sense of humor. The storm came right over our house. And poor Roselle was just shaking and shivering under my desk. She just really couldn't cope with that stuff. And I did everything I could to make noise, but she shivered and shook. And finally at 2 o'clock, it all passed and we were able to go back up and go to bed. At 7:40 that morning, we got to the World Trade Center. The people were just arriving with a cart of stuff that we had ordered for breakfast. I opened the office, the Port Authority cafeteria from the 44th floor. Those people came in, they set up breakfast. I went in and got the materials necessary to run the PowerPoint shows, got my laptop, got the PowerPoint projector all set up. And then David Frank arrived. David was the colleague from our corporate office who was working with distribution and with our reseller channel. David was there not to do the seminar, but rather to answer questions that his customers had about pricing and so on, things that I didn't need to deal with. And it was also a way for David to establish a better relationship with people. My sales staff was not going to be in that day. My sales staff was going to be out selling, supporting their manager, earning him an income, and he liked that. I had done some things during my tenure around the World Trade Center that I felt I needed to do. I had learned, as I have indicated to you in so many ways, a lot about teamwork, but I also learned that I was the team leader working with guide dogs, and I also learned I was the team leader of the office. And that meant I had to act and be able to be as confident as a leader. I distinguish between that and being a boss. Some bosses are leaders, but unfortunately for a lot of bosses, sometimes and often, all too often, leaders are not bosses. As the leader, I needed to help set the vision for the office, create the teams that I described earlier, add value to everything that my sales force was doing, and do anything I could to make it better, easier, and more practical for them to be successful at selling. Oh, sometimes we had to have sharp words with salespeople, but mostly it was teamwork. And that's a strong motivator. Wanting to please because it's the right thing to do. Also, as a leader, I needed to be able to do things like if we were going to go to lunch with people, guests, customers, and so on, I needed to know where restaurants were. How would it look if we're getting ready to negotiate a contract for millions of dollars and we decide we're going to go to lunch, and I stand up and say, well, I don't know where anything is. I'm going to have to hold someone's arm because I can't get there on my own. That's going to be great in 2 hours when we're negotiating heavy-duty contracts. So the reality is I needed to know things like how to get around the World Trade Center, what to do in emergencies. I had to be as good or better than anyone else at that because that was my job. A lot of people say if you're a person with a disability, you've got to work harder than anyone else just to do as well. And my response is balderdash. We should all be working as hard as we possibly can. And if I'm working harder than other people, that's because they're not working hard enough. We should all be using every skill that we have to be as successful as we can. That should be our responsibilities. And if we're not working harder and somebody else is, whose problem is that? It doesn't need to be competitive, but it means really working hard means you figure out ways to enhance each other and improve what you're doing. So I learned how to get around. Well, David came in. He brought a few of the early Ingram micro arrivals. This was about 8 o'clock. They had breakfast, and David came into my office, and we started doing final preparations, such as creating the final list of everyone who would be coming that day to attend seminars. The Port Authority required that every person show ID and be authorized before they could go into the World Trade Center. You couldn't go up in elevators until you were approved. 2 ways to do it. 1, they could call up every time someone came in. 2, we could send a list on letterhead with all the people and they could cross off names. And when they got somebody who was approved by a list or whatever, they stood them in front of a camera, a photo was taken, it was put on a badge, put on a chain, and you had to wear that badge around your neck all the time you were in the World Trade Center. It also had the barcode that allowed you to go into the elevator areas and go up to where you needed to go. At 8:45, we got the list done. We were just ready to print it. In fact, I reached to a file cabinet to get a piece of stationery when suddenly we heard a muffled explosion. We heard and felt the building kind of shudder and shake and groan. And then suddenly the building began to tip. And I'm holding my hand up in the air for anyone who can't see it, my palm facing you, and all of a sudden, as I'm tipping my hand, the building just started tipping and tipped and tipped and tipped. It just kept moving. We moved about 20 feet. Building just kept tipping. David and I both said, "What's going on? What is it? What do you think?" "I don't know." I said, "Do you think it's an explosion?" He said, "It doesn't seem like it's an explosion to me." Was it an earthquake? Dave was from the Bronx. He didn't know about earthquakes, even though he was living in Irvine now. I said, no, it doesn't act like an earthquake, because an earthquake doesn't just tip a building in one way. Imagine a spring that you fasten to a desk, and then you push the top of the spring. As it bends, that's what the tower was doing. Because you see, the World Trade Center was built with expansion joints like springs. The Empire State Building had been struck in the 1940s. It was flexible to be able to handle big windstorms and so on. Likewise, the World Trade Center was constructed to be able to handle that. It was built to allow for even an airplane to hit the building. Of course, no one expected a plane fully loaded with 26,000 pounds of fuel to hit the building. In any case, the building kept tipping. Me, having grown up in Palmdale, California, right on the San Andreas Fault, I moved over to the side of the office right by the door. In fact, I stood in the doorway. Supposedly, you know, like they tell you in physics, an arch is the strongest part of a structure and all that. Yeah, that's really going to make a lot of sense on the 78th floor at a non-bearing wall if the building tips over. But hey, you know, you go with what you got. In any case, I stood there. The building kept tipping. Then David and I said goodbye to each other because we thought we were about to take a 78th floor plunge to the street. We said goodbye, and I was just holding my breath waiting for it to happen, and all of a sudden the building started slowing down. It stopped. After a second or so, it started moving back the other way. And I remember releasing my breath and letting it out. The building started tipping back, and finally it got to be vertical. As soon as it became vertical, I left the doorway and I went into my office, and I met my fifth guide dog, Roselle, coming out from under my desk. Stairs later. Roselle had been asleep under my desk, so I met her coming out from under my desk. I told her to heel, which meant to come around on my left-hand side and to sit. Come here. Just like Africa is doing. I hope you all can see her. About that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. Of course, as we know today, that's because the expansion joints were moving back into their normal configuration. But we didn't know that or think about that at the time. As soon as the building stopped falling, David, who was standing on the other side of my desk near our windows, just turned and looked out the window and started shouting, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke, and there are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our window. We got to get out of here right now. We can't stay here. The building's on fire." I could hear debris falling outside our window. I said, "Slow down, David." No, we got to get out of here." "No, slow down, David." "No, we got to get out of here. The building's on fire." Our guests began to scream. They started moving toward our exit. David said, "There are millions of pieces of paper falling outside the window. They're on fire. We can't stay here." "Slow down, David." No, we got to get out of here right now." Then the big line, "You don't understand. You can't see it." He's right. I'm amazed at how many reporters have interviewed me since 9/11, and they said, "Well, of course you didn't know an airplane hit the building because you couldn't see it. You're blind." I said, "Excuse me. The airplane hit on the 96th floor on the north side of the building. We were on the south side on the 78th floor. How many people do you know of who could have seen from our floor through 18 floors to the other side of the building and seen what happened?" The last time I heard, we didn't have X-ray vision yet. But that's how people rationalize it. People often ask me, "Do you think that because of technology, blind people are a lot better than we used to be?" Well, the technology has made it possible to become more clued in and in tune with information and so on. But the attitudes really haven't changed. The attitudes haven't changed a lick. That's the problem. The Gallup polling organization says that one of the top 5 fears in this country is going blind, and that 76% of all people fear blindness over any other physical disability. That's prejudice. Blind people couldn't buy, and any person with a disability for years couldn't buy life insurance because insurance companies said, well, your disability is going to make you be at a higher risk. And it wasn't until some people challenged and said, show us the evidence, prove to us that people with disabilities and blind people are a higher risk. And the insurance companies, they went, actually, we don't have any evidence. It's just true. And finally, we started working in the National Federation of the Blind and passed legislation and got legislation passed in every state in the union, and a model regulation at the federal level with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners that said, unless you can show actuarial statistics and evidentiary data, you cannot discriminate against persons with disabilities based on their disability. But until like the mid-1980s, I couldn't even buy life insurance. My parents couldn't buy life insurance for me. Blind people had to band together and change that. Oh, there are other things that are going on. You wouldn't believe it. Did you know that it is legal in this country for an organization to apply for an exemption from the federal government so that they don't have to pay a worker with a disability minimum wage? And that there are workers in this country who are earning like 3 cents an hour? And it's legal. We are hoping that H.R. 831 and legislation in the Senate and our efforts will now finally get that changed. There are 66 organizations relating to persons with disabilities and the President's National Council on Disabilities that are all calling for the repeal of Section 14C of the so-called Fair Labor Standards Act. We hope that it will finally happen, because the reality is if a person is in any kind of a work situation, then they should be able to get minimum wage at least. And if the agencies aren't providing the right kind of jobs for them, then the agencies aren't doing their job. Not everybody can do the same job. Only 50% of all Labrador Retrievers, the most successful guide dog breed, only 50% are able to be guide dogs. And it's not because the other 50% are bad. It's because not every dog is cut out to be a guide dog. Not every person is cut out to be a physicist or a public speaker, for that matter. So in any case, David is going, the building's on fire, we got to get out of here. Our guests began to scream. They started moving toward the exits. And I kept telling David, calm down. And he said, as I said, you can't see it, you don't understand. The problem is, I was observing something that David wasn't. Namely, a dog sitting right next to me who wasn't giving any indication that she had any fear. You've all read stories about dogs that got people out of buildings, or other animals that got people out of buildings because they detected fire and they went and bothered them until they were noticed and they got them out and so on. Roselle wasn't doing any of that. She was yawning and wagging her tail. I finally got David to focus, and I said, get our guests to the stairs and get them out, and then we'll go. I called Karen. Karen wanted to know what had happened because I said that there had been an explosion or something and we were leaving, and I said, I don't know anything beyond that, but I'll call you as soon as I can. David came back, we swept the offices, we went then to the stairs and started down. I'd collected a few things, put it in a backpack. David grabbed his laptop. Laptops were heavy back in those days. I wasn't going to carry a laptop. Besides, I worked for a company that was specialized in backup, and I had backed up all my data at home, so I was good. We started down, and almost immediately I began smelling an odor, and the odor I smelled was familiar, but I couldn't place it. It took a couple of floors to realize I'm smelling what I smell at airports. I'm smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. I observed that to other people, and they said, oh, that's what it is. We were trying to figure it out. You're right. We must have been hit by an airplane. We started down. We kept going down. We got down about 10 floors, and then we heard from above us, burn victim coming through, move to the side. The stairs were wide enough that we could get to the outside edge and stand facing inward while people passed us on the stairs, and a group of people surrounding a woman who was very badly burned over the upper part of her body. Her clothes had been burned away and so on. She passed us going down the stairs. A few floors later, we heard it again. Burn victim coming through, move to the side. And another person David described as even more severely burned than the first passed us. We knew after that how bad it had to be above us. A few floors later, a woman near us just stopped on the stairs and said, I can't breathe, I can't go on, we're not going to make it out. 8 or 9 of us stopped, surrounded her. Literally there on the stairs, we had a group hug. We said, it's okay, you can keep going, you can do it, we're all in this together. Roselle gave her kisses, and I encouraged, other people encouraged. Finally, she was able to keep going down the stairs. Teamwork! We all didn't know each other, but we knew what needed to be done. We needed to keep panic from coming to the stairwell. Sure, it was tense, but we didn't need panic. We went on down the stairs and we got to about the 50th floor, and suddenly David said, "Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here." I just said, "Stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you." He told me later that snapping at him like that brought him out of his funk. I have a secondary teaching credential, and one of the courses I took in training for being a teacher was how to talk to your kids. I had the voice course down, so that was why I was able to say what I did to David. No, seriously, I snapped at him very deliberately because I wanted him to pay attention. I needed him not to panic. He told me later that that brought him out of it, as I said. He then said, "I'm going to walk down a floor below you and I'm going to shout up to you whatever I see on the stairs. That's how I'm going to have something else to do." And he did. "Hey, I'm at the 48th floor, Mike." I was at 49. "Everything is okay here, going on down to 47. We're okay." David told me that he wanted to do that to help me. I think that's one of the most incredible and brave and heroic things that I have seen on 9/11 or any other time. Because what David was doing, whether he realized it or not, was acting as a focal point for anyone who could hear him. "Hey, I'm at the 47th floor, everything is good." Think of all the people on the stairs worried about what's going on, and here's David saying, "I'm good here." Wherever he was, it was good. They had that much higher level of comfort, and they had a voice to follow. Or if they were below him, people below him knew, "Oh, it's okay there. Well, we must be doing okay." I thought that was incredible. I still do. He helped, whether he knows it or not, hundreds, maybe thousands of people that day. 46th floor, everything is good. Meanwhile, I'm up focusing on Roselle. I didn't want to sound nervous for Roselle. I needed Roselle to focus and be calm and confident. Remember, we're a team. As the team leader, my job is to give her directions. Her job is to make sure that we walk straight and safe until I tell her to turn. Contrary to popular belief, the dog is not the brains of the outfit. Her job isn't to know where I want to go, nor is it how to get there. That's my job. Her job is to get us there safely. We come to a street corner. I tell her to go forward to cross the street because I listen to the way the traffic is going. In Newtonian mechanics, we all know that two pieces of matter cannot occupy the same space at the same time. And if I want to cross the street safely, I don't want to cross when cars are going across in front of me. I want to go when they're going the same way I do. Now, in quantum mechanics, I mean, it could esoterically be something different, but you know, we're not going to squeeze between atoms here and all that kind of stuff. And so, bottom line is that I didn't want to get hit by a car because there's a corollary to that. Two pieces of matter cannot occupy the same space at the same time. The corollary is the bigger piece wins. I didn't want that. I waited till the traffic's going the way I wanted to go, and then I would tell the dog to go forward. We start across the street, and suddenly the dog jerks back. My job is to follow the dog. That is a time that she gets to exercise leadership. Dogs don't lead blind people, they guide blind people. But there are times that they can exercise leadership. It's called intelligent disobedience. She jerks back or he jerks back because they see a car coming that we didn't hear, perhaps a hybrid car or whatever. But our job is to follow the dog. The dog moves us out of the way, keeps us safe, and then we go on our way again. I direct the dog. So I want to encourage Roselle, my fifth guide dog. We had been together since November of 1999, 22 months now, and I'm telling her, good girl, keep going forward down the stairs. I decided, how many stairs are we going to go down? So I started counting. 10 stairs, left. Good job, Roselle. Forward, down 9 stairs. David, I'm on the 45th floor. Everything is good here. What a good girl, Roselle. Left, forward, down 10 stairs, left, forward, down 9 stairs. I'm at the 45th floor. David's at the 44th floor. Hey, I'm at the 44th floor. This is where the Port Authority cafeteria is. Not stopping, going on down the stairs. Forward, Roselle. Good girl. 10 stairs on one flight, 9 stairs, and then we're at the next floor down. 19 stairs between floors. Gee, I wonder how many stairs that means we're going to walk down. So I'm sitting there going, okay, we're going to go from the 78th floor to the first floor. That's 77 floors. We're going to go down. 77 times 19 equals Don't give me this a lot of stairs. No calculators either. I didn't have one. You guys don't get one. 1,463 stairs I calculate. Good estimate. Learn to do math in your head. It's more fun that way, you guys. So I'm going on down. I get to the 44th floor. David's at the 43rd floor. Everything is good. I learned later that a lot of people were following me. They were watching me because I was going down, sounding confident, encouraging Roselle. Roselle was doing her job. They were following us going down the stairs. I met a woman in August in Kansas City. She contacted me because she knew I was going to be there to speak, and she said, I was on the 54th floor when you passed us. I want to meet you. And so we met, and she said, I followed you guys down the stairs, and we made it out because of you. You went faster than we did, but I knew that if you were going down safe, we could. A lot of people have told me that. We all helped each other. Other people who were sounding confident and good and giving me the chance to chat with them helped me. Everyone helped each other. We knew we had to keep panic out of the stairs. Teamwork. I got to the 40th floor, though, and I did have a fear. My fear was this. I'm doing great going down these stairs. This is really okay. We're going to make it out. I'm sure we are. Although I'm going to keep a listen in case suddenly the building rumbles and starts to collapse or whatever. A lot of good it's going to do me. But I'm listening. But I'm sure we're going to make it out. But you know what? I got to worry. I said to myself. My worry was, we have power and lighting on the stairs, and what's going to happen if we lose it? I'm going to be stuck on the stairs with thousands of functionally blind people who can't find their way out of a paper bag. See, Thomas Edison invented the electric light for you guys to mitigate your disability, namely light dependence. You guys don't do well in the dark. If you don't have light, you just don't do really well. Turn the light on to go to the bathroom or whatever the case happens to be. Turn the light on to read. Blind people saved California from going into total blackout back in 2000 because at least we didn't need to turn lights on to read. Keep that in mind. Be grateful to blind people. The fact of the matter is that I was the only one who was prepared in that area to work in the dark. And I was worried about panic if we suddenly lost our lights. So I thought about this and I went, okay, I can deal with this. I took the airline approach. You know, they give those flight briefings before you take off, and most people don't listen. But anyway, I said, hey, everybody. And I said it as loud as I could so anyone within the sound of my voice could hear it, because I was assuming that some people would remember it later if we lost power and lighting. By the way, we did not. Anyway, I said, hey, everybody, if we lose power and lighting on the stairs, don't anybody worry. My name is Mike. I've got my guide dog, Roselle, here. I'm blind. We are offering a half-price special to get you out today only. People were being pretty quiet. I wanted to make them laugh. Later, when they started getting quiet, I said, you know what? They're not going to let us back in this building for a while, but when they do, let's all meet on the 78th floor at 8:45 in the morning and walk down the stairs together. What a great way to lose weight, huh? You know, it was all about all of us helping each other. Anyway, we kept going down the stairs, and eventually David got to the 30th floor, and when he got there, he said, hey, I'm at the 30th floor, and I see firefighters coming up the stairs. Everybody move to the side. Let them out. Let them by. I went on down to where he was, and I said, so what are you seeing? Because they weren't there yet. He said, well, they're coming up the stairs. We learned later it took them a minute to go from one floor up to the next, and it took us about 20 seconds to go down from one floor to the next. That's why I said, by the way, we're going to start at the 78th floor and walk down to lose weight. I'm not dumb. I took a master's degree in physics. I know about gravity. Not dumb. Anyway, the first guy gets to us, and he stops in front of us, and he goes, hey, buddy, you okay? You know how they talk back there in New York, right? Hey, buddy, yo. You know, bada bing, all that stuff. And I went, yeah, I'm good, no problem. Well, that's really nice. I'll tell you what, we're going to send somebody down the stairs with you to make sure you get out. With you? With you? You know with you? W-I-T-Y-A, with you. To make sure you get out. I said, no, you don't need to do that. I've come down from the 78th floor. I really don't need help. I got my guide dog. We're all okay. That's really nice. Well, we're going to send somebody down the stairs with you to make sure you get out. I said, look, you really don't need to. And again, I said, I got my guide dog here. And he said, well, that's really nice. And he starts petting Roselle. Wasn't the time to give him a lecture about don't pet a guide dog in harness. By the way, keep that in mind. Guide dog in harness, hands off, don't talk to, don't even look at, don't make eye contact with. Dog is busy. Harness on, dog is busy. Even if dog looks asleep, Dog is prepared to work at a moment's notice. Do not interact with any animal in vest or harness. They're working. People come up and say, can I pet your dog? And I say, no. Oh, I got to really pet your dog. And they start petting her, and she looks at them because she's a dog, right? And the first thing I do is jerk hard on the leash and tell the dog, no, leave it. And they go, well, why are you yelling at the dog? I got the dog in trouble. And I said, you're right, you got the dog in trouble. The dog should have known better. The dog shouldn't be interacting with you. I will deal with the dog, then I'll deal with you. Do not deal with in any way a dog in harness. Ignore it. Now, you can ask if you can pet the dog. I will probably tell you no. But what I will say is, if I have time, I'll take the harness off, and then you can talk to the dog. And I'm telling you, we're going to be out signing books afterward, in all seriousness. I will take the harness off when we're out there, because Africa loves attention as much as the next person. You will see an entirely different dog. She will be wiggly and squirmy and just having a good old time. We had her meet like about 900 school kids a couple of weeks ago. And so what does Africa do? All these kids are coming up. I mean, hundreds of kids all surrounding her. And so what does she do? She flips on her back, puts all 4 feet in the air, and she's loving it. But only because the harness was off. It's hard to get them to recognize that, and it's so easy to break that. So I'm telling you in general, don't interact with dog with harness on or vest on or whatever. Anyway, he pets the dog. Wasn't time to give him that lecture. It also wasn't the time to give him a lecture about blindnesses and the handicap. It's really your attitude that's the problem. So I just said, look, I got my friend David over here. David can see. David and I are walking down the stairs together, and he goes to David, you're with him? David goes, yeah, he's okay, leave him alone. And he says, okay, all right, well, then we're good, and we're going to go on up the stairs. And he leaves us, giving Roselle a few more pets. Roselle gives him a few kisses. He then walks on up the stairs, probably having received the last unconditional love he ever got in his life. They are the heroes of 9/11, the first responders, the firefighters, and so many others who acted with poise, people around the country. But the people we lost on 9/11 truly are heroes. And I never ask people to do things like mourn their passing, because I remember how they bravely walked up the stairs, focused, acting calm, acting like it was just like any other day. They went by us, 50 of them, men and women alike, going up the stairs. I would ask you to help me not be mournful of their passing, but rather help me celebrate their lives. Would you just give a round of applause for the people and the heroes we lost on 9/11? And wherever they are, I hope they heard that. Thank you very much. We continued on down. David reassumed his scouting position. 28th floor, I was at 29, 27, 26. Hey, someone's passing up water bottles. Roselle was getting pretty thirsty. It was getting pretty warm on the stairs because of all the press of bodies. Now with the addition of all the firefighters, we didn't have as much space to walk down, so it was getting pretty crowded and slow moving. David came up with a water bottle. We made cups out of our hands. We gave Roselle some water. We had some water, and then we were able to keep going on down the stairs together. Finally, we got to the second floor. David was at the first floor. He said, the water sprinklers are on. You're going to have to run through a curtain of water to get out of the stairwell. And then he was gone. I got to the first floor, and I heard this torrential downpour of water. It just sounded like a little waterfall. I've been on Boy Scout camps. I knew what waterfalls sounded like, and it sounded just like that. And I'll tell you, when I went through it, it felt like that. I just took Roselle's harness. I told her to go forward, hop up, which is to speed up, pay attention, and we burst through this torrential downpour of water, heavier than any rainstorm. I think I've only been in one storm that came down anywhere near like that sprinkler waterfall did, and that was a storm that was actually the trailing edge of a tornado. We got like an inch in 5 minutes. It was just a lot of water. We came out into the lobby of One World Trade Center, normal and quiet. Now, this chaotic scene. The water was ankle deep on the floor because the sprinklers were filling up the building with water. People were shouting, go this way, don't go over there, no, don't go outside, go this way. This guy comes up to David and me, he introduces himself as being with the FBI. I'm sitting there thinking, I didn't do it. No, not really. He said, I'm with the FBI. And I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, no time to tell you, but we're here to get you out. The Port Authority police are here. The New York police are here. The fire department's here. We're here. We're getting everybody out. Just follow me. And he ran with us trailing through the lobby, through revolving doors, into the central part of the World Trade Center. They wouldn't let us go outside through the exits of Tower 1 because that would have put us right below where people were jumping. So we got into the central part and we kept running. Normally there'd be thousands of people in that area. It's a concourse. It was a shopping mall. There was a Duane Reade drugstore, a number of bank buildings, a Hallmark store, a 24-hour photo passport place. There was a Radio Shack there, fun at Christmas time. And all the other things that you'd see in a little shopping mall. There were also the important places, the Ben & Jerry's ice cream cart right outside the doors in the central part, right outside our doors. Yeah, we made sure we were close to Ben & Jerry's, you know. On restaurants, Fine and Shapiro Deli and other places and so on. We ran through. Now it was so empty you could hear your foot fall as you ran through. Finally up an escalator at 9:45 in the morning, an hour after the plane hit, we were outside for the first time in sunlight. We got outside. We were told to leave the area, and that's all we were told. If I were to describe the biggest challenge I have as a blind person in the world, it is a lack of access to information. I mean, what are your eyes except information receptors? What are your ears except even better information receptors? But they get different kinds of information. It is so amazing in this digital age where so much is becoming more and more electronic and can be made accessible, organizations continue to refuse not to make it accessible. Airline kiosks, you know, those things you check in with at every airport, they're not accessible. And the airlines refuse to make them accessible. The government has finally stepped in and is making proposed rules that would mandate that kiosks be made accessible. And the regulations are incredibly strong and firm. It says, for example, that in 10 years, 1/4 of all kiosks are to be made accessible. That's really bright. In 10 years, the technology won't even be the same. The airlines are just not willing to do it. And it's trivial. The websites are not all accessible, and it's trivial. But they don't, because they don't consider us equal, full, first-class citizens in society, which is all too often the case across the board. Blind potential lawyers have been trying to take the LSAT for years, and they are categorically denied because they're not allowed to use their accessible technology. It took a lawsuit against lawyers to finally compel the bar associations and the LSAT people to make their tests fully accessible. It shouldn't be that way. I tell you all that because when we got outside, no one would tell us anything about what was going on. David looked around and said, Mike, I see fire in Tower 2. I said, really? He said, yeah, there's fire. What the heck is that all about? I don't know. Our building had tipped toward Tower 2. Maybe the fire jumped across and an airplane hit. We had heard rumors that 2 airplanes collided and one went out of control and hit one of the towers and maybe another one hit another. Who knew? We didn't know. I know I would rather have known everything that was occurring. Not to be nosy, but because then I could make decisions. I don't care how bad it is. I know myself well enough to know I would rather have known because it would have changed our decision. Our decision was to go over to Broadway and start walking north on Broadway. Eventually we got to Ann Street. That put us diagonally right across from Tower 2. David said, I want to stop and take a picture of the fire. I can see it up there really clearly and I want to get some pictures. Okay. I took out my phone. I tried to call Karen. I couldn't get through because the circuits were busy. As we now know, people were saying goodbye to their loved ones. I had just put my phone away. By the way, we were 100 yards away from Tower 2. It's a 400-yard tall building. I was just putting my phone away. David was putting his camera away when a police officer yelled, "Get out of here, it's coming down!" And suddenly we heard this rumble that turned into this deafening roar. The sound I describe is kind of a combination of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear glass breaking and clattering and metal clattering, and then this white noise sound as the building collapsed. Everyone just turned and ran. Everyone was going in different directions. David was gone. He didn't wait for anything. He was gone. I bodily lifted Roselle and turned her around, and we started running back on Broadway the same way we had come. We had been walking on the west side of the street, so right to my left was a building, right to my right was Broadway. We were walking north on Broadway. Now when I turned around going south on Broadway, the building was right on my right-hand side, and I could hear through all the noises there was a little bit of an overhang above me, and I stayed under that overhang as much as I could because I could hear debris falling all around us, and I didn't want to get hit, and I didn't want Roselle to get hit. We did get struck by a few small pieces, but we kept running, and we finally made it to Fulton Street, the next street back. I turned right to try to block some of the debris. We ran for a little bit, and suddenly we caught David. David had stopped because he realized that he had left us. He was going to come back and get us, but before he could, I found him. And I said, "Don't worry, we're here." And he said, "Oh, I apologize." I said, "Don't apologize. Let's keep going. The building's coming down." And we started to run. Almost immediately, we were engulfed in the dust cloud. All the dirt and debris and junk and dust, all the stuff that made up the cloud. You all saw it on television, I'm sure. We were in it. David said, "I can't see my hand 6 inches in front of my face." I can tell you that it was so thick that I could feel with every breath I took everything going down my throat. I could feel it going into my lungs and settling. I literally could feel it. We knew we were suffocating in that stuff and we had to get out of it. So as we were running, I wasn't sure how Roselle was able to keep going, but she was. I didn't know what she could see. I don't know whether she could hear me, but I kept telling her, right, because I wanted her to go into the first entrance if she happened to see it before I heard it. All of a sudden, I heard an entrance on my right. Obviously, Roselle saw it. She turned right. She took one step, and she stopped, and she wouldn't move. She wasn't afraid. She just wouldn't move. And I knew there had to be a reason. So I investigated with a foot in the hand, found a stair rail, discovered that we were at the top of a flight of stairs. She had done her job perfectly. We walked down the stairs and found ourselves in the entrance to the Fulton Street subway station. As we got to the bottom, there was a woman there who was crying, saying, "Somebody help me, my eyes are filled with dirt, I can't see, I don't want to fall into the subway." I came down close to her, I took her hand, and I said, "Hey, don't worry, my name is Mike, I happen to be blind, I've got my guide dog here, Roselle will keep both of us from falling down the stairs, and besides, you're a long way away from the stairs, you're like 7, 8, 10 feet away from the stairs, you're okay, clean out your eyes." We were there for about a minute when a gentleman came up the stairs from further down, and he introduced himself as Lou, an employee of the subway system. He said, "There's an employee locker room I can take everybody to." There were several of us there. He took us down to the locker room where there were water fountains, benches, and there was a fan, and we just stayed there for about 10 minutes until a police officer came and said, "You need to leave the area now. It's clear up above." He didn't wait for any discussion. He just turned. We followed him back to the stairs, up the 2 flights of stairs, into the little arcade that we had stopped in, up the last 2 flights of stairs, and finally got outside. When we got outside, Roselle was doing okay, and David said, "Well, the air's a little bit clearer," and looked around, and then he said, "Oh my God, Mike, there's no Tower 2 anymore." I said, "What do you see?" He said, "All I see are pillars of smoke, hundreds of feet tall. That's all I see. It's gone." We stood there for a moment, then we just turned and continued west on Fulton Street. We walked for about 10 minutes, then we found ourselves in this little plaza area, and suddenly we heard that freight train waterfall sound again. We assumed it was our building collapsing. We thought we were safe from flying debris. We were far enough away at this point, but David did look back and see a dust cloud coming, so we ran to the side to avoid most of it, covered our faces, hunkered down, and waited for it to pass. As soon as it subsided, the noise stopped, the cloud passed, the wind died down, we stood up, opened our eyes. David looked around and said, "Oh my God, Mike, there's no World Trade Center anymore." I said, "David, what do you see?" And he said, "All I see are fingers of fire and flame hundreds of feet tall and pillars of smoke. The towers are gone." To think, 3 hours before we had gone into that building, into that complex just to do our jobs, and now in the blink of an eye it was gone. We stood there for a moment. Then I took out my phone. I tried to call Karen, my wife. This time I got through. And after some tears on both sides of the phone, she's the one who told us how 2 aircraft had deliberately been crashed into the towers, 1 into the Pentagon, and a 4th was still missing. The United States had been attacked by terrorists. We spent the rest of the day getting home. Finally made it home at 7 o'clock that night. A friend had come to stay with Karen, Tom Painter, who Karen had known in high school in California. Tom was living in New Jersey. Without knowing whether I was in the World Trade Center that day or not, he just dropped everything and drove down to be with us. He got there and Karen told him that I was in the complex, and then later I called, of course, and then they both knew I was okay. Tom drove Karen to the train station because she didn't want to drive our van. We got to the train station about the same time. I got to the Westfield station, came off the train, went down the stairs, heard our van pulling up and the ramp coming down. I went across the sidewalk, finally got to go up into the ramp and hug Karen for the first time at 7 that night. We went home. The first thing when I went home, I took Roselle's harness off. She was met by my previous guide dog, Linny, who was still living with us. Linny was also a lab. And the first thing Roselle did was ran off, went to her toys, grabbed her favorite tug bone, and brought it back so Linny and Roselle could just play tug of war. Does that put 9/11 in perspective or what? Which, again, summarizes the adage, don't worry about the things that you can't control. Focus on the things you can. The rest will take care of itself. My parents had no control over me going blind, but they had a choice of how to deal with it. I had a choice of how to behave and live my life after being kicked off of the school bus. I had a choice after once being removed from an airplane simply because I had a guide dog. I had a choice as to whether I was going to associate with a whole bunch more blind people who had a similar philosophy and who, by every definition that people could find, are called radicals, but who only want to live the same kind of equal life as everyone else. Or I could just go hide. But I know that in reality, we're not going to change attitudes and opinions if some of us just don't stand up and do it. It doesn't matter what it is. We have to make the decision to use our tools to move forward and progress. And that is the final lesson, I guess, that I can leave with you today. How much time do we have? We got about 10 more minutes. We really don't have a lot of time for questions, but if anybody has a question, can we have somebody who... No, I'll let you raise your hands. We'll take about 2 or 3 questions, and then I have a couple things I want to read. Anybody have a question? There is no question off limits, by the way. I've been asked questions by 3rd graders. You guys can't match them. I had a kid ask me once, how do blind people have sex? So I'm telling you, you can't ask a tough question. You know, think about that. Blind people have sex differently than other people? That's what he was asking. No one is going to have the courage to ask me, I bet, how did you answer him? So I'm just going to tell you. The answer was the same way everybody else does. If you want to know more, go ask your mother. Somebody have a question? Yes. How has the whole situation affected my faith? You know, there's only so much time to tell the story, so I will tell you this. As we were running from Tower 2 collapsing, the first thing I thought of was, God, I can't believe that you got us out of a building just to have it fall on us. And as soon as I thought that, I heard a voice in my head as clearly as you hear me that said, don't worry about what you can't control. Focus on running with Roselle and the rest will take care of itself. And then I was just engulfed in this sense that if we worked together, we'd be okay. I was certain. No, my faith has been strong, and it certainly was strengthened that day. I have always had a strong faith in God. I also believe that we don't have the right to condemn other religions. I think we miss the point a lot of times, as do other religions miss the point a lot of times. If we look at all the world's major religions, they really teach the same basic things. It's the radicals in every religion that make it tougher for all of us. I mean, look at pop Look at Prop 8. You know, and originally more people were against it than for it. Then churches came in and created a lot of fear. And eventually it passed, and now it's gone again. But you know what? I submit that all those people, those good Christians who came in and were talking about the horrible nature of gays and gay rights and all that, isn't there this little thing in the Bible that Jesus said, judge not lest ye be judged, and then this other thing about he or she who is without sin, let them be the one to cast the first stone. Who gave us the right to judge? I don't happen to be gay, although friends of mine are. If things are all equal to something, everything is equal. So I have lots of faith. One more question.
Do you think your dog saved your life?
As much as I saved hers. You know, yes. Look, going down the stairs is not magic. I could do it with a dog or a cane or whatever. I do think running away from Tower 2, where there was panic and nobody was paying attention to anyone, I actually probably had a little bit of an advantage using a dog over a cane in that one situation. Because if I'd had my cane sticking out, somebody would have tripped over it, probably broken it, and may have hurt them. But in general, it doesn't matter whether you're using a cane or a dog. That's not the issue. The issue is you having the skill to travel and use the tools that you have. But yeah, Roselle certainly saved my life that day. We both save each other's lives on a regular basis, especially as we're walking across the street with all the nutty drivers that are going on in the world. If you get a chance, go to www.blinddriverchallenge.org. You will see a blind man driving a car around the Daytona Speedway before the Rolex 24 race. It was a challenge made by Mark Maurer, the president of the National Federation of the Blind, in 2001. Dr. Maurer challenged universities and private industry to build a car blind people could drive. They did. Another gentleman named Mark Riccobono drove it successfully around the Daytona Speedway, and if you go to blinddriverchallenge.org, you can see it. And I'm telling you this, go back and look, speaking of insurance people warping data, go back and look in the insurance files of any insurance company. I submit that you will find that fewer blind drivers have accidents than sighted drivers, so I don't see the problem. You guys, I'd like to leave you with just two things. The first is, it's guide dog wisdom, lessons I learned from Roselle on 9/11. It goes like this. Number one, there's a time to work and a time to play. Know the difference. When the harness goes on, it's time to work. Work hard. Others are depending on you. Number two, focus in and use all of your senses. Learn to tell the difference between a harmless thunderstorm and a true emergency. Don't let your sight get in the way of your vision. Number three, sometimes the way is hard, but if you work together, someone will pass along a water bottle just when you need it. Number four, Roselle's favorite, always, but always kiss firefighters. Number five, ignore distractions. There's more to life than playing fetch or chasing tennis balls. Number six, listen carefully to those who are wiser and more experienced than you. They'll help you find the way. Number seven, don't stop until work is over. Sometimes being a hero is just doing your job. Number eight, the dust cloud won't last forever. Keep going and look for the way out. It will come. Number nine, shake off the dust and move on. Remember the first guide dog command, forward. Number 10, when work is over, play hard with your friends, and don't forget to share your favorite Boda-Bone. Okay, I have one more thing I would like to share with you. These are words that were uttered by Dr. Jacobus Tenbrook, the founder and first president of the National Federation of the Blind. Dr. Tenbrook was a constitutional law scholar at the University of California at Berkeley, one of the most notable scholars on tort law in the country. At the 1956 convention of the National Federation of the Blind, Dr. Tenbrook delivered, as usual, the banquet speech. The end of his speech went something like this. The speech is called Within the Grace of God. The final part of the speech went thusly. In the 16th century, John Bradford made a famous remark. By the way, remember, this is a speech being given to blind people. In the 16th century, John Bradford made a famous remark which has ever since been held up to us as a model of Christian humility and correct charity, and which you saw reflected in some of the concepts and attitudes I've discussed today. Seeing a blind beggar in his rags creeping along a wall through a flash of lightning in a stormy night, Bradford said, "But for the grace of God, there go I." Compassion was shown. Pity was shown. Charity was shown. Humility was shown. There was even an acknowledgement that the relative positions of the two could and might have been switched. Yet, despite the compassion, despite the pity, despite the charity, despite the humility, how insufferably arrogant, Bradford, there was still an unbridgeable gulf between Bradford and the beggar. There was not one, but two. Whatever might have been, Bradford thought himself Bradford, and the beggar was still a beggar. One high, the other low. One wise, the other misguided. One strong, the other weak. One virtuous, the other depraved. We do not and cannot take the Bradford approach. It is not just that beggary is the badge of our past, and it is all too often still the case, and it is even still the present symbol of attitudes toward us, although it is at least part of our history, and we're moving on. But in the broader sense, we are that beggar, and he is each of us. We are made in the same image and out of the same ingredients. We have the same weaknesses and strengths, the same feelings, emotions, and drives. And we are the product of the same social, economic, and other environmental forces. How much more consummate with the facts of individual and social life, how much more a part of a true humanity to say instead, there, within the grace of God, do go I. Everyone, thanks for coming, and thank you very much for listening.
Please join us in the lobby for some refreshments and signing of the books. Thank you.